Harrison Ford didn't have the typical rise to stardom. For years, he struggled to even get his foot in the door. Despite his dreams of becoming an actor, Hollywood barely took notice, and after a string of dead-end roles and missed opportunities, he turned to carpentry to support his family. What started as a fallback soon became a steady career, with Ford earning a solid reputation for his craftsmanship, far removed from the spotlight. So how did a failing actor turned carpenter go from working with his hands to headlining some of the biggest movies of all time? To find out, let's dive in and take a look at how a carpenter became Hollywood's biggest star. Harrison Ford moved out to Hollywood in the early 60s, with dreams of being an actor. Soon after arriving, he signed a contract with Columbia Pictures' New Talent program, and appeared as a bellhop in Dead Heat on a merry-go-round. The following day, he was called into the head of the New Talent program's office, and was told he didn't have it, and would never be a star. The executive pointed to Tony Curtis, saying that when Curtis delivered a bag of groceries in his first film appearance, you could tell he was destined to be a star. But Ford, not so much. Ford leaned across the desk and replied, "I thought the idea was for me to look like a bellhop." Unfortunately for Ford, that comment didn't go over well. The producer was offended, and Ford was quickly pushed to the bottom of the call list, and eventually let go. Still determined, Ford later found small roles on television through Universal, playing bit parts on episodic TV. But his goal was always to act in films. That break nearly came when French director Jacques Demy chose Ford to star in his first American film, Model Shop. But once again, Columbia intervened. The studio head told Demy that Ford had no future in film and insisted he cast a more experienced actor instead. Frustrated and determined to hold out for better roles, Ford realized he needed to find another way to make a living, while also supporting his young family. A friend who worked as a recording engineer introduced him to Brazilian musician Sergio Mendes, who was looking to build a $100,000 recording studio in his backyard. When Ford showed up for the interview, he dressed the part, and got the job. Ford would later joke that Mendes never asked if he'd actually built anything like this before. To learn the ropes and complete the job, Ford checked out books on carpentry from the Encino Public Library, hired skilled carpenters, and picked up the trade as he went. Even though it seemed like no one in Hollywood believed in Ford, there was one person who saw his potential: producer and casting director Fred Roos. Roos had an eye for talent. He was also instrumental in launching the career of Jack Nicholson, and after gaining prominence as Francis Ford Coppola's trusted collaborator following The Godfather, Roos began casting for the Coppola-produced, George Lucas-directed 1950s coming-of-age film American Graffiti, and pushed hard to get Ford an audition for the role of hot rodder Bob Falfa. Ford agreed to take the part, with the condition that he wouldn't have to cut his hair, which might hurt his chances at landing future roles set in the present day. Since the script called for a flat top, they compromised by having Ford wear a Stetson. Lucas offered him $485 a week, but Ford asked for a $15 raise, to make up for what he'd lose by stepping away from his carpentry work for a few weeks. It wasn't a leading role, but it got him back to the big screen. Fred Roos continued to quietly advocate for Ford behind the scenes, helping him land a small role in Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation. Originally written as a nameless, one-dimensional assistant, Ford felt the role lacked depth, and took a bold, creative risk. He chose to play the character as gay, a risky move in 1974, and personally spent $900 on a loud, green flannel suit to bring him to life. At first, Coppola was taken aback by the choice, but after discussing it with Ford, he embraced the interpretation. Impressed by Ford's commitment, Coppola expanded the role, gave the character a name, Martin Stett, and even had the production designer for the film create a custom office that reflected the character's personality. What began as a minor cameo became a memorable supporting role, thanks to Ford's instincts and Roos's unwavering belief in his talent, and one that would lead to another small part in Coppola's next film after The Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now. Just before landing the role that would change his life, Harrison Ford was once again doing carpentry work, this time as a favor to a friend. Francis Ford Coppola's art director had built a custom door for Coppola's office. It needed someone to install it, and Ford agreed, on one condition: he'd only work at night, as he didn't want people thinking he was there angling to be cast in a movie. However, installing the door went well into the next morning, and as he was finishing the job, in walked George Lucas, beginning the casting process for Star Wars. Ford said hello, they exchanged a few words, and that was it. A few days later, the producers called and asked if he'd help read lines with actors auditioning for various roles. Ford agreed, thinking it was just a favor as he didn't believe he had any shot at a part, especially since Lucas had specifically said he didn't want to reuse anyone from American Graffiti. As the auditions went on, Ford not only read scenes with the actors, but found himself tasked with having to explain the story to them too. Eventually, Ford's dry wit wit, sarcastic edge, and simmering impatience started to stand out. Lucas began to see something in him that was perfect for Han Solo, eventually offering him the part. After the film came out, Ford rocketed to superstardom, but still had to finish what would become his final carpentry job. Despite the massive success of Star Wars, Harrison Ford didn't instantly become a go-to leading man. That status wouldn't truly be cemented until Raiders of the Lost Ark, a role that nearly went to someone else. The film, conceived by George Lucas and directed by Steven Spielberg, needed the right actor to bring Indiana Jones to life. Spielberg immediately suggested Ford, but Lucas was hesitant. Having already cast him in American Graffiti and Star Wars, Lucas feared Ford would become his version of Robert De Niro to Martin Scorsese, an actor he used too often. Instead, they cast a then unknown TV actor named Tom Selleck. But just as things were moving forward, a major conflict emerged. Selleck had just filmed the pilot for Magnum P.I. and was under contract with CBS, which held the rights to the series if it went forward. As Spielberg and Lucas tried negotiating with the network to allow Selleck time to shoot Raiders, CBS, realizing they had a hot commodity in Selleck, rushed Magnum P.I. into production, locking Selleck in and forcing him to drop out of the film. With time running out and production set to begin in just weeks, Spielberg once again pushed for Ford. This time, Lucas relented. They brought Ford the script, who read it, loved it, and signed on, securing his place not just as Han Solo, but as one of the biggest movie stars of his generation. Ford would then return to science fiction with Blade Runner, drawn to the role of Rick Deckard, because it offered him a chance to play a character with far more dramatic complexity than Han Solo or Indiana Jones. But behind the scenes, the production was anything but smooth. Ford and director Ridley Scott clashed throughout filming, with creative tensions growing over their different interpretations of the story. Ford believed Deckard was human, while Scott was convinced he was a replicant, a fundamental disagreement that colored much of their collaboration. After Scott was removed from the final stages of post-production, the studio grew nervous about the film's ambiguity and insisted on adding a voiceover narration to make the story easier to follow. Ford was furious, feeling the film worked without it. Resentful of the studio and their lack of respect for Scott's vision, Ford deliberately delivered the voiceover with as little enthusiasm as possible, hoping it would be scrapped. "I was obliged to do the voiceovers for people that did not represent the director's interest," he recalled. "I went kicking and screaming to the studio to record it." Witness marked a major turning point in Ford's career, earning him his first and only Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The 1985 thriller, directed by Peter Weir, gave Ford the opportunity to step away from blockbuster roles and prove himself as a serious dramatic actor. Playing John Book, a detective who goes into hiding in an Amish community, Ford delivered a quietly powerful performance that showcased a depth and vulnerability audiences hadn't seen before. The role also gave him a chance to bring a bit of his past into the film. During the barn building sequence, Ford's real-life carpentry experience added authenticity to one of the most memorable moments in the movie, as he worked alongside other actors to construct the structure on screen. Ford's box office dominance continued into the 90s, when he won the role of Jack Ryan in Patriot Games, taking over from Alec Baldwin, who played the character in The Hunt for Red October. However, this casting change wasn't without controversy. Baldwin had committed to a Broadway run of A Streetcar Named Desire, while Paramount wanted him to agree to an open-ended clause that would tie him exclusively to the Jack Ryan sequels, essentially forcing him to wait around until production began. On the other hand, the studio owed Harrison Ford a large sum of money for a film that was greenlit but abruptly canceled at the last minute a few years earlier, and bringing Ford into the Jack Ryan franchise was a strategic move to offset that debt while securing a much more proven box office draw. Director John McTiernan had originally wanted Ford for the role in the first film, and later admitted that a great deal of scheming went on to push Alec Baldwin out of the part. Following the success of Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, Harrison Ford solidified his box office dominance with Air Force One, playing a tough, take-no-prisoners president who personally takes down terrorists mid-flight. But Ford didn't just bring that commanding energy to the screen, he brought it behind the scenes too. When he learned that Paramount planned to release Titanic on the exact same weekend as Air Force One, Ford saw it as a major threat to his film's box office performance. As a result, Ford warned the studio that if Titanic released that weekend, or even within 2 weeks on either side, he'd reconsider working with Paramount in the future, including any potential Jack Ryan sequels. It was a power move worthy of his on-screen persona, and Paramount got the message loud and clear. In the end, Titanic was delayed, giving James Cameron more time to finish the film, while Air Force One had the runway to itself, as Ford essentially delivered a real-life version of his famous line, "Get off my plane," further proving that in the 90s, few stars carried as much weight as Harrison Ford. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.